Welcome into this episode of Mondays in Midtown. I'm your host, Willie McKenna. Coming up on this episode, we have an exclusive interview with GIC speaker Julie Otuska as she came to speak to St. Louis University students. Coming up next, we have basketball interviews previewing this upcoming 2011-2012 basketball season. We sat down with Cody Ellis of your Billikens and also assistant coach Chris Harriman. After that, we will have a political panel featuring Amy Lutz and Max Jordan. They will come in and represent the Republican and Democratic sides and discuss current political issues going on in the world. After that, we sat down with Professor Avis Meyer as he told us some of his stories from his past newspaper business. Very interesting stuff there. All that and more on this edition of Mondays in Midtown. And welcome into Mondays in Midtown. Our first segment is going to be our exclusive interview with Julie Otuska. Julie came in and talked as the GIC speaker to SLU students. She hit on topics such as Japanese internment camps, which her grandmother was in, and also she was the author of the first-year book that all freshmen had to read coming into SLU this year. Our very own Amanda Huntingford went and sat down with her. Let's take a look at that interview.
Thank you for coming on Mondays in Midtown.
Oh, you're welcome. It's a pleasure.
Your book, When the Emperor Was Divine, was assigned to the freshman summer reading. What do you hope that the freshmen, as well as others who read your book, get out of it? What do you hope they do?
I would hope that they would just know what it felt like to have gone through that experience of being sent away to a camp. But I don't really like to prescribe what a reader should take away. I think that's one of the beautiful things about reading is that every person, you bring your own sensibility to a story. So I would like it maybe if everyone came away with something different. But I guess experientially just to know maybe what it was like to have gone through that.
Could you tell me a little bit about your speech tonight and what you're talking about?
Yeah, I'm going to talk, part of it is about my own family and what they went through during World War II. So part of it's very personal. About my mother was, that the girl in the story would kind of be the real life equivalent of my mother is the real life equivalent of the girl in the book. So I'll talk a little bit about what happened to her and her family during the war. And then the second half of the talk is really about the writing of the book, the writing process, which to me is, I always like to hear how other writers work, so it's kind of about that.
I hear one recurring question in your novel is about what it means to be loyal or disloyal and how we can tell. Is there any component of the current immigration debates and today's defense laws that you find especially troubling or interesting, given your knowledge of the Japanese internment camps?
Well, there's a lot that's troubling to me about what's going on now, especially, I finished writing my book in June of 2001, so I had no idea that it would resonate in the way that it has post 9/11. But in terms of what's happening now to Muslims and Arabs and how they've been singled out as, now you just have a different immigrant group that is the other and problematic. Before it was the Japanese post Pearl Harbor, now it's Muslims and Arabs post 9/11, and I think the treatment is very similar. Also Guantanamo, my grandfather was labeled and he was arrested as being a dangerous enemy alien, and I think that's very similar to being an enemy combatant today. And I do see a lot of parallels between now and then.
You tell the story of When the Emperor Was Divine from many different points of view. Mm-hmm. What made you decide to choose multiple perspectives?
It evolved very organically. I didn't know that I was writing a novel when I started writing about this family. So the first chapter I just wrote as a standalone story, and I happened to tell it from the mother's point of view. And the next chapter I also just wrote as a standalone story. I didn't know that it was chapter 2 of a novel until later. And the second chapter is set on a train. It's told from the daughter's point of view. And then once I realized that those two stories that I'd written might add up to the beginnings of a novel, then it made sense as I continued to write about this family to explore different points of view, because I'd already explored the mother and the girl's point of view. And also, it just kept it fresh for me as a writer. I really like going into different characters' heads. It just kept the... I think if I had sat down to write a novel, I probably would have assumed you should just tell it from one character's point of view, and I probably would have told it from the mother's point of view. So that's what I mean by it happened organically. But it was also just fun. It was fun to explore different characters, you know, to enter their heads. It kept it just very alive for me.
Interesting. You stated that your own family stories were inspiration for your books. How does that affect your writing and the events that you describe? Do you tell any of them exactly as you were told them, or do you tend to take elements?
There's a lot that I grew up not knowing about. I mean, this is not really discussed, and I think that's typical of many Japanese American families. What happened during World War II was just not talked about in the home. So a lot of the details in this novel are either from my research or just that I've made up. Some of them are taken from stories that I remember my mother telling me, but a lot of them are not. So, and once I decided to try and tell this story, I realized that I knew a lot less about what had happened during the war than I thought I did. And although I thought at one point that I could really mine my mother for information, when I started writing the novel, she was in the early phases of Alzheimer's, so she was no longer a reliable source of information, so I had to do a lot more research than I thought I would.
Your most recent book, Good in the End,
Mm-hmm.
focuses on mail order brides
Mm-hmm.
that have recently come to the United States. Is there anything that you've discovered that you think is particularly interesting or that most people should know?
Oh, I think everything is really interesting about just that whole scenario. I mean, it's unimaginable to me to, you know, just the thought of being 14 or 15, going to a country where you don't speak the language, it's thousands of miles away, you know, taking this harrowing voyage on a ship to marry someone that you've never met, that you've only exchanged letters and photographs with. It just seems to me, I could not imagine doing that. And yet it's a very, very common first-generation story. So I was just fascinated. And I mean, many people's grandmothers came over as picture brides. And when I was touring for my first book, people would come up to me afterwards who were in the audience, Japanese Americans, and they would start telling me stories about their mother or their grandmother or their great aunt who'd come over as a picture bride. And then they'd say, well, you know, when she finally saw her husband standing there on the dock, like, he was so short, or he was, you know, he was not the handsome man that he, you know, often these men had sent away, you know, doctored photographs or photographs that were 20 years old, or they lied about their financial status. So I was just, you know, and I just thought, well, if I had been born 100 years ago, what would I have done? I mean, your options were very limited as a woman back then. And many of them, I think, were desperate to leave Japan. Japan was a very poor country of rice farmers. So all of these young girls had heard stories about the good life in America, and they had no idea, I think, about what was in store for them and the racism and how hard it would actually be. But I just thought it was really, really interesting material.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Amanda, for that great interview with Julie Otuska. Great speech that she did, and hopefully very inspiring for many of our SLU students. Coming up next, we went to the Chaffetz Arena for the blue and white scrimmage. We sat down with Cody Ellis, Dwayne Evans, and also assistant coach Chris Harriman. Let's see what they have to say about this upcoming Billiken basketball season. And welcome into the Chaffetz Arena. It's Billiken Fan Fest here today. A bunch of Billiken basketball fans came out today to take a look at their 2011-2012 men's basketball team. I'm now joined by sophomore Dwayne Evans. Dwayne, last year, first year on the team here at the Billikens, you had a really good season. Coach alluded to it in the speech about your rebounding skills. Not necessarily probably the start you wanted for the team last year, but talk about maybe what you expect out of this team this year with a good recruiting class.
Yeah, the recruiting class is big. John Manning, Grandy, and Emmanuel added a lot of different pieces to our team, and I think we returned pretty much probably 90% of our team from last year. So all the troubles that we had last year, we're hoping to build on those this year. And hopefully make a run for the tournament, conference championships, and much more.
Now, you being a freshman last year, you got quite a bit of playing time as a freshman, which you may not have gotten at another school. Tell me how that helped you coming into this season and help some of the other guys. I mean, you guys are much more experienced than some other sophomores playing college basketball right now.
Yeah, I mean, different things fell into place where we, as a freshman class, had to step in right away. And I think we executed pretty well. Our record probably didn't really reflect it, but we definitely grew. And I think building on that from all that experience last year, now meshing with Quam and Jake Barnett now, it'll definitely just make for a much more exciting season now.
You brought that up about Kwame. How tough was that last year not having him on the court? You obviously had him on the sidelines, probably one of the biggest cheerleaders you guys had last year. But how tough was that not having him out there on the court?
I mean, we didn't really think too much about it. There was nothing we could do. It was out of our hands. So we kind of just focused on the guys who could play. And he was in practice every day trying to help us and play really good defense in practice, obviously. And but we really just kind of focused as a group and getting better as a team.
Now, for you personally, like we said, great rebounder last year. I know you were joking before you want to be the leading rebounder again probably this year. What are your personal goals for your season?
I mean, definitely be leading rebounder. Just kind of fit whatever role coach and my team needs me to be. I mean, either whether it's scoring, rebounding, just kind of having a defensive presence. I kind of just want to do it all.
In your opinion, also Jake Barnett, new this year, or was here last year, but couldn't play, redshirted transfer. What is he going to add to this Billiken team?
Jake's a really good shooter, and he's really intense on the court, plays pretty good defense, and overall he's just a really good team player. I think he'll definitely add a key piece that we didn't have last year necessarily this year, so we'll hopefully have different results.
Finally, you guys had a great group of fans out here today come out to watch your blue and white scrimmage. Your fans stuck with you last year through the growing process. If you had to say one thing to the fans this year, what they can expect from you, from your team, what would you want to tell them?
Just to hang in there with us. I mean, last year they definitely stuck around, and this year we're going to have a better product on the court, and hopefully that reflects come game time, November 2nd.
That's sophomore Dwayne Evans of your St. Louis men's basketball team. I'm now joined by Cody Ellis, junior here for your St. Louis University men's Billiken team. Cody, sophomore year last year, you come in, you have an injury, takes you out for quite a few games at the end of the season. How disappointing was that for you to lose that much valuable time on the court?
It's always disappointing to lose, any time on the court. But, one of the disappointing things was that, I didn't get a full year my freshman year as well. So, I've been here, this is my third year now. I think I've played maybe one complete full season. It's always disappointing, but, it gave me an opportunity to get a full summer in, work on my conditioning with my shoulder out when I couldn't do anything with it. So I think in the long run, it's helped.
I know it's difficult, you can't look into your crystal ball or anything, but what kind of things are you doing to maybe stay a little bit healthier this year and hopefully increase your time on the court?
Obviously conditioning's a big thing. Being in condition so I can, stay on the court, stay fit, stay healthy. Our weights coach has done a good job, getting all of us in condition. I think that's one of the main things, absolutely.
Now for you as a junior, you're kind of transitioning into that leadership type of role, being one of the elder statesmen on the team now. How do you handle that type of position, trying to lead some of these younger guys who are, playing their first games here coming up in their freshman year?
Being in the system for 2 years now, I know the system, I know the coaches, know what coach wants. That definitely helps in talking to the new guys coming in, your John Manning, your Grandy Glaze, who are the big men who I have to help out a lot. Having a mentor like Brian Conklin when I first got here, like a bigger brother, he helped me a lot. And I'm just trying to do what he did to me. So.
You mentioned trying to help Grandy a lot, kind of transitioned into this from Toronto, a good pickup for the Billikens, I think. What do you see out of him so far? As you may be sharing some time with him, or if not, at least he's going to be learning from you. What do you think of his playing style so far?
He is unbelievably strong. He goes after it hard no matter what. If coach says stop, he'll still go. He's a little out of control sometimes, but I think that's what we need. Someone like that, because no matter what, he's going to go after the ball, which is something we don't really have.
Finally, you guys are picked to finish third in the Atlantic 10. I know you guys probably don't look into those kind of stats a whole lot. You just want to go out and play your game. But at the same time, what expectations do you personally have for this team?
Well, I think we can compete for an A10 championship. I think we got the talent. I think the guys are working real hard. I think if we gel together like we should, then we're gonna be a force in this conference.
Now, outside of staying healthy for you, what are some of your personal goals for this season?
I mean, look, at the moment it's kind of hard because we're trying to be like a team orientated. So I haven't really thought too much into my personal goals at the moment. I want to, my free throw percentage, I want to get up, 3-point percentage. I want to be able to, guard guys a lot better as well. And I think, with the full summer of fitness and conditioning and lifting and all that, I think all that's just gonna happen for me.
Finally, I know you guys are excited to get the season going, especially after a scrimmage like this. You see all your fans coming out to support you here. If you had to say one thing to your fans, they stuck with you guys last year when you had a bit of a tough season, a growing season. What do you want to say to your fans coming up for this next basketball season?
I appreciate the support always. Thanks for sticking with us through the tough times. It's going to be an exciting year, I think. Obviously come out. We're going to make things happen. So.
That's junior Cody Ellis of your St. Louis men's basketball team. And we are now joined on Mondays in Midtown by assistant head coach for your Billiken men's basketball team, Chris Harriman. Chris, thank you for joining us here on Mondays in Midtown.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so last season, a bit of a tough season for the Billikens. What do you guys change this year? What do you expect out of yourselves? You're ranked number 3 preseason in the Atlantic 10. What do you guys expect out of yourselves this season?
Well, I don't know that we change much about ourselves. I think experiencing what we went through last year ultimately gave some of the younger guys more experience. And then when you add back a Cormaine Mitchell and the incoming freshmen, John Manning, Grandy Glaze, Emmanuel, you start to get that depth that we've never had. So I think it's an encouraging year because we have the talent now. We have more depth than we've ever had, and we've got a lot of guys who have experienced a lot of minutes, and I think that ultimately helps you.
Now, speaking of Cormaine, how big is it having a guy like that, not just the talent, but the leadership out there? How big is it to have him back on the court?
It brings a lot to the table, and like you said, he's not just a good player, he's a leader of our team. And I think when Cormaine steps back on the floor, our other players immediately had more confidence. And I think they believe, and we are, better than what we were before because of Cormaine. And I think he brings a calmer presence, and he also brings a guy that at the end of games, he's a guy you can go to late in the clock, and I think that helps us.
Now, you spoke a little bit about freshman John Manning. Last year, a bit of a different situation. You had a lot of freshmen getting a lot of playing time, guys like Rob Lowe, Dwayne Evans, a lot of playing time last year. How much playing time can we expect out of the freshmen this year?
Well, the good thing we have is we have competition, and I don't think that'll ever be sorted until we hit the certain point in the season when that competition is going to decide who plays more minutes. I can tell you this, he's going to help us, and I think he's going to play. How much, that's going to be decided upon him and the rest of the guys in the team. I do think that John is a more mature freshman than we've ever had. Physically, he's stronger. He loves contact, and I think he'll help us more early defensively than he will offensively, but ultimately he'll help us just as much both ways.
Coach Majerus talked on this a little bit during the little conference with the fans over there. He talked about the guys like Brian Daly and Grant who walk onto the team. They don't necessarily see a lot of court time, but what exactly to you do they mean to this Billiken team?
They mean everything, and I think it's something that every day they come and they bring the effort and energy to practice. They help with whatever's necessary. Some days they may not even get into practice, but they're right there helping the team along, supporting the guys, and when we get later on during the season, and then they're running a scout team against our guys. There's a big purpose, and we have guys that have been around for a while and valuable, and we know how important they are for us. So we love them. We're thankful to have them.
One other question: as the assistant coach, you work a lot with Coach Majerus, one of the historic coaches in college basketball. What's it like to get to work with someone like that? Not just work with him, but learn from him.
It's a blessing. I tell everybody that it's the equivalent of doing your basketball PhD. Every day you come to work, you learn something new, and that's why I do it for him. and I'm lucky enough to have that job. But he inspires me every day because he is a genius. He has the idiosyncrasies of most geniuses, but he's also he's phenomenal in terms of strategic, but also from a standpoint of keeping guys on task. And there's not a day that goes by that you don't learn something new from him. And he's just he's a pleasure to work for, and I'm thankful that I have the opportunity every day to work for him.
And finally, you have fans coming out watching your scrimmage today, the blue and white scrimmage here at Fan Fest. It's just a scrimmage, and you have people coming out to see you guys. They stuck with you last year through a tough season. Right. If you had to say one thing to the fans about this Billiken team coming up for the 2011-2012 season, what would you want to say to them?
Well, I tell everybody all the time that I truly feel like we have the best fans in the league. And I know everybody talks about Xavier and Dayton, but to go what we went through last year and to have the kind of support we had, to me, was unbelievable. And we owe it to them to win games this year. We owe it to them to play extremely hard. I mean, we had an ice storm last year, which Coach talks about all the time. We had 4,000 fans here, and that's inspiring. You know, to have that many people support us after what we've been through, it's time to repay the fans for all their support.
That is assistant coach Chris Harriman here on Mondays in Midtown. Sounds like an exciting season that we can look forward to for Billiken basketball. Remember, check the Billiken website to look up all home games and go out to support your Billiken basketball team here on campus at the Chaifetz Arena. Coming up next, we have a political panel which will be featuring Republican side Amy Lutz and Democratic side Max Jordan. Let's go ahead over to the desk and see what they have to say.
We're here now with Amy Lutz and Max Jordan from College Republicans and College Democrats, respectively. Amy and Max, it's been a couple of weeks since we've talked to you last. What have been the main developments in the presidential campaign? Where do you see it going right now?
I'll let Amy take that one first. Her party is the one that has the primary.
Exactly. I will. I mean, there certainly have been some major shifts in the party in the last couple weeks. I think we can honestly say that Rick Perry's campaign has exploded for multiple reasons. I will give my three major reasons why I think Rick Perry's campaign has blown up. Number one, he can't debate, obviously. I think we saw that in his gaffe last week. Number two, he struggled with a lot of big issues. I mean, i.e. illegal immigration. There's this Gardasil issue that a lot of conservatives, a lot of Republicans are not happy with. And number three, there's a number three. Oops. Anyway, moving on.
Did you see that at the debate he challenged Minority Leader Pelosi to a debate, and she tweeted him today and gave two reasons why she couldn't attend because she was going to Baltimore or something like that, and then she said, number three, I forgot the third thing.
Well, he absolutely deserves that, I think. I mean,
yeah.
You have to assume that everybody's going to make a mistake at some point, but that was a pretty bad one.
I mean, it was one of the poorest debate performances by a presidential candidate since they started televising them in 1960. I mean, it was absolutely horrendous. I don't think that his campaign, quote unquote, is like toast, but I mean, he has a lot of ground to make up. Obviously, his firewall state's probably South Carolina. I mean, I think the nomination will probably be decided in Florida. Yeah. But in the end, I think that a lot of interesting things are happening in the primary from my party's perspective. I mean, you've got 90s retro fever with Newt Gingrich coming back. I mean, it really honestly feels like that every week someone else is tying Romney in a national poll.
Yeah.
I mean, the poor guy's finally coming out of his shell to finally do some media. And I think that's going to be very interesting. John Huntsman's dad is funding a super PAC in New Hampshire, and they've dropped $800,000 in TV ads this week for him. And then tonight, Herman Cain got Secret Service protection. So, I mean, it's been a really, really interesting week. And, I mean, with Cain and Perry descending and Gingrich ascending, I think it's going to be another really interesting month going into January in the Iowa caucuses. I mean, it's crunch time, and I think you can really finally get that sentiment.
And I think continuing on what we talked about last time is that, I mean, Republicans were looking for a Chris Christie or a Paul Ryan or Mitch Daniels to kind of fill that maybe social conservative side that people don't really see in Romney. And I think we've seen in the last couple of weeks that these couple of candidates who have really descended have not fulfilled that ideal.
I mean, I would say that, and I said this with all respect to Governor Romney, I mean, he's an elected governor of a major state, but he's Ken doll. I mean, and all you need is Barbie with him. I mean, he absolutely is emotionless. I mean, if I could create a presidential candidate from scratch, I would pretty much probably build Mitt Romney. I mean, he keeps his mouth shut, but he just reminds me too much of Thomas Dewey. I mean, in 1948, you know the famous line, Dewey defeats Truman, and then Truman holds it up the next day, and he's still president. I mean, I feel like the party's telling him to keep his mouth shut and act like Lincoln, and he's going to be president. And I don't necessarily agree with that. So
yeah, I mean, I think it's important to not, just kind of step back and watch everybody else implode. I mean, we've seen Rick Perry, we've seen Herman Cain, but I think that concept is really what's keeping up people like Romney, and look at Newt Gingrich now, is that, obviously Newt Gingrich has a lot of baggage. He's done a lot of things that a lot of Republicans don't agree with.
That's an understatement.
That is an incredible understatement, but he has not had the recent scandals like Herman Cain and like the gaffes like Rick Perry, and it just kind of stepped back, and I think people are kind of turning to him now, but pretty soon I feel like his campaign is going to go in the same direction that Perry and Cain's did and just kind of go downhill, and Romney is going to be still standing. You just got to figure that someone's going to get hot at the right time, and someone has to challenge Romney. I just don't think he walks to this. And I mean, he's strong in New Hampshire, he's weak in Iowa and South Carolina, but I mean, if it's not going to be now, then it's not going to be. I feel Absolutely.
like I think this is December or late November, early December will probably be like the make or break time period for him and his candidacy. I feel like.
I agree, and then through these 50 million Republican debates,
There's one a week.
Figure it out pretty soon.
I think they need to cut back. This is definitely oversaturation.
I completely agree.
All right, so when the conventions are said and done, who do you think is going to be on the party tickets?
At this rate, if you don't mind, I'll go first again. I think we got to agree it's got to be Romney. Probably he's the only one again who's not really been too tainted by scandals. As far as VP goes, I know that a lot of people are saying, it's Romney and then everybody else running for VP. You got to look to the current field to see who's going to be VP. But I personally don't know if that's necessarily how it's going to turn out. I know there's been lots of talk about maybe a Marco Rubio run or someone to kind of counterbalance Romney, kind of the more young, more fresh Tea Party vote in a sense that Romney can't fulfill.
From my perspective, it has to be Romney. I mean, I feel like they're going to settle for Romney in the end. I mean, he runs 2 to 5 points behind the president in almost every national poll. He's competitive in some major swing states. I mean, he's the only one, I think, at this point that could really keep it close. Now, at the same time, I think there's a much deeper slate of vice presidential prospects than there are presidential prospects in the Republican Party right now. You've got Marco Rubio, Susan Martinez from New Mexico. You've got Paul Ryan has to be on a short list. I mean, everyone talks him up crazy.
It'd be wonderful.
I mean, you have all the candidates on stage today. I mean, it's going to be really, really interesting. I don't see like a out of left field pick like Palin was. I think it's going to be a stalwart, someone relatively young, probably in their mid 40s, early 50s, not much younger than Governor Romney. I mean, the betting favorite is Marco Rubio because he keeps Florida in play. And, he's part of an ethnic group that the Republican Party needs to make inroads with, if I can be frank. So I would say Romney Rubio would pretty much be the odds-on favorite. But I could see like 3 or 4 other choices pretty much fulfilling that aspect.
And on the Democratic side, do you see any chance that it's not Obama-Biden?
It's President Obama and Vice President Biden. I mean, there's always those speculative rumors that, he's calling Hillary. They're going to switch places. I mean, I feel like for Vice President Biden, I mean, let's say in 2016, say they win again, which, all indications from my perspective is they will. I mean, he'll be well into his mid to late 70s by then. He's not running for president. I mean, so I feel like being vice president is like the final stepping stone in a long career of public service for him. And I feel like the president, has a firm grasp on the party. I mean, the man just has raised $90 million. Not even counting super PAC money that isn't really reported. So I mean, no one's going to contest President Obama in any meaningful way. And if they would, they would be doing it right now in New Hampshire. So.
Yeah. I mean, as far as the vice president pick, I totally agree. I definitely think it will be Obama-Biden once again. I mean, the only viable other option, Hillary Clinton, has said no, it's not happening. And I think she's just about done with her political career, as she's come out and said. And I mean, from a Republican perspective, I mean, what are we going to do without the one-man gaffe machine in Joe Biden? You know, I mean, he provides such hilarity.
I mean, he's a brilliant foreign policy mind, but Vice President Biden gets his way, gets a little off on tangents in front of microphones. But I think this really leads to an interesting point that if you would ask me right now, I feel like the Democratic Party bench in 4 to 8 years is relatively weak. I mean, I think there's a lot of could-be's, but not a lot of people that are going to be. I mean, if I can put it in that perspective, while in the Republican side, I mean, you've got a slew of young, fresh candidates that could really make a dent on the national scene, and I feel like that's a certain bit of brightness in what has been a dreary election cycle for your party, I think.
I completely agree. I mean, maybe we should be focusing on 2016 instead of 2012.
I mean, yeah, that's going to be, if you think the primary's bad now, 2016 is going to be off the charts.
It'll be amazing, I'll be honest. I mean, you got possibilities with Chris Christie, Paul Ryan, Marco Rubio even running.
You get all three of those. I think that's a pretty much guarantee at that point. I mean, especially with, 8 years Obama fatigue, incumbent vice presidents rarely have, the chance to continue on. I mean, George H.W. Bush was the last one. Mm-hmm. I mean, so no, it's gonna be a field day.
It will be. It'll be great.
So the super committee in Congress is facing down their deadline.
Yeah.
What do you make of their chances on a proposal that enough members can agree with?
Can I start?
Yeah. No, go right ahead.
I mean, the drop dead date is rapidly approaching. I mean, it might be a week away. Yeah, it might be a week away. I think that in the end there will be no grand bargain that so many have called for. You'll see the automatic cuts, the $1.2 trillion. Those are going to hurt. Those are going to hurt really bad. And I think that we would miss an opportunity in American history to do something that would really, really live on as a testament to how we solve problems. And I mean, I'm willing to compromise on health, on Medicaid, Medicare, and Social Security, if I can get $800 billion in revenue from somewhere, from some party. So, I mean, we always dream that cooler heads will prevail, and I don't think this is the case. But I'm heartened to see that other people are taking interest. I mean, there was a bipartisan group of 40 congressmen that signed a letter saying, "Go big on this." I mean, this is a moment to do it. You've got the all kinds of gangs in the Senate. I didn't know there were so many gangs in the Senate.
Apparently, yeah.
I didn't know that Bloods and Crips had representation in the U.S. Senate. But I would really, really hate to see them miss this wonderful opportunity. So,
I mean, I'm going to agree with you part of it, disagree with part of it. I mean, from the beginning, I saw the Super Committee as not being efficient. I mean, I think it's a perfect example of putting a bunch of politicians together and thinking that something's going to happen. I mean, obviously there are contentions between both parties. They're both highly partisan. They're not going to really agree on one big thing. So I agree it'll probably end up being these automatic cuts.
Yeah.
I mean, from my perspective, I don't think they're cutting enough. What I would like to see from this, I'd like to see massive cuts all across the board and no tax cuts or tax hikes, excuse me. And that's if a deal gets worked out. It looks like there's probably tax hikes in the works, but I think it's unfortunate that our country's future is resting on the arguments, the petty disagreements of several politicians.
I mean, in the end, your philosophic point is well taken. Of course, I disagree on policy, but at the same time, I think ultimately the Super Congress will live on, and the Super Committee will live on as an example of kicking the can down the road, even if the can is only being kicked 30 days down the road. I mean, I feel like, we send them there to vote. They should be able to make a judgment call on this. I mean, it's immensely disappointing, and you've just got such a broad swath of American society wanting or yearning for something, just an agreement in general. I mean, just some form of explicit agreement saying we can work with this, and that's not happening. And it's unfortunate. It's a tragedy. And it proves once again that I feel like that our government's only moved by crisis, and it's going to take some kind of massive fiscal crisis to really resolve this. And I mean, people aren't moved by, people aren't moved by common sense. They're so often moved by ideology. And it's, I mean, it's just an absolute mess.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree.
Okay, so the president is currently traveling to the Asia-Pacific countries. What do you make of his trips or any of his messages that he's been promoting?
I mean, what I see from the trips he's going on is I think it's very important to create these connections with some of the Asian Pacific nations and all nations around the world, because we are a very interconnected globe in a sense, through technology, through communication. But my real question is why now? Why is this necessary? Because I mean, I think our state in the world depends on our domestic front, and we've got, obviously, we just talked about the super committee, a lot of problems going on in our domestic front. No one works together. Our debt just reached $15 trillion. And while it's important to work with other nations around the globe, I think we need to get our home front figured out before we go on and try to figure everything else out around the world.
I mean, presidential trips are presidential trips. They're meant to express American power abroad. They're meant to express that we're alive and kicking and that we're at least interested. I mean, the Asian Pacific Summit is, a traditional one that I think the president almost always attends. And, I mean, growth is immense in the eastern part of the world right now. I mean, China, South Korea, even Japan with, their crisis over the past couple months have really kind of soldiered on, and, their currency's still remarkably strong. They're still, one of the world's top consumer economies, and they buy a lot of our stuff, and we buy a lot of theirs, in all honesty. And so it's important to solidify those trade agreements. I mean, on a personal level, I feel like that presidential travel in general is the easiest thing to criticize. I mean, because he's the president of the United States. I mean, there's no good time to leave the country. I mean, you're dealing with issues that are, beyond the imagination of most ordinary Americans, and the decisions are nothing but hard ones. So I feel like that it's just easy to criticize presidential travel. I know my party did it, during the presidency of George W. Bush. I mean, it's the first thing you do because it's an easy scapegoat, because the president can do whatever he wants and go anywhere he wants in all of reality. So I mean, it's good to get him out of the bubble at the same time and get him into the rest of the world. I mean, if I were president, I'd probably get really tired of spending 150 to 200 days a year in the White House. Yeah. I mean, it's probably a pain. So I mean, it's positive. He was in Europe a couple months ago. I mean, he's doing the whole travel thing. But I think you've got the vice president is hopping across the country right now too. So I feel like that when you have one abroad, you have one at home, and I've never seen either of them. I don't think they're allowed to be out of the country together.
In the same place at the same time, most of the time.
I'm not briefed on Secret Service procedure, but I'm sure there's some kind of rule. But I mean, he should be there. His message is good. I mean, there's going to be a whole lot of our products sold in that part of the world in the next 20 to 30 years. So, I mean, I'm supportive of it.
Yeah, I mean, again, going off that, it is important that we show, that message that we are supportive of other nations, that we're going to reach out. But, I mean, and again, like you said, it's very easy to criticize presidential trips, but this is coming from a guy who seemingly plays golf every other week, who is always on trips, and I feel like, when does it end? I mean, we're in this crisis, and although this one has a purpose, I mean, I think there's a good reason he's over there. Maybe there are other ways of expressing it and other ways of really, showing what the real message is.
I mean, true, and I mean, from the golf aspect, just a little bit in jest. I mean, he's doing a job that carries burdens unimaginable. It ages you terribly. I mean, if the man wants to play golf on an Air Force base when he's over abroad, I mean, I don't have too much of an issue with it.
I don't either.
But at the same time, I want to point out that I think the president really hit a nerve during this last trip when he called out China and their currency policy. I feel like that he was very strong and very critical in his remarks, and I thought that they were very timely at the same time. And I feel like that, I mean, that's a positive example of something that he does. And, part of it is keeping other world leaders, taking them to task. I mean, we've got to prove that, we're tough at home and tough abroad. And, I mean, criticize the president as you will on his domestic policies. I think his presidency is shaping up to be one of the great foreign policy presidencies in American history. I really think so.
I mean, I suppose if you go off maybe the last trip, and I will agree, he has said some forceful things, but I mean, this is a guy who goes on apology tours through Europe, and I don't feel like that's, you know, really the most strong perspective that we can portray.
I'll let that one go.
All right.
All right, then. Amy Lutz of College Republicans and Max Jordan from College Democrats, thank you very much for coming on Mondays in Midtown.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for that great political panel, Amy and Max from College Republicans and College Democrats. We appreciate you coming in to Mondays in Midtown and sitting down with us and talking about these political issues that we have going on in the world right now. Coming up next, we have Professor Avis Meyer, a newspaper writing teacher in Xavier, the College of Arts and Science. He sat down with us and told us a little bit about his experiences in the newspaper business. This should be interesting. Let's go ahead and take a look at that interview.
In 1987, when I visited Russia, and the Great Wall of Berlin was still up, it was still the full-blown Cold War, I ended up sitting in a restaurant with a journalist from Novosti, which is sort of the Russian version of AP at the time. We sat and had dinner at a fairly fancy restaurant near Red Square and started talking about journalism generally. At the time, Russia was much more tightly controlled than it is now. And we got in talking about the philosophy of newspapers, which was pretty interesting for me and for him, as it turned out, because our worlds are substantially different. He asked me at one point a couple of really good questions that I use in my class a lot. In fact, the person taping this has heard both these stories. He asked me how I can say that the American press is free when, in fact, advertisers own about half of each paper, metaphorically, because they pay half of the salary of everybody on board, and advertising is what makes papers run, not subscription. He said, how can you say it's a free press? And I told him the key word is competition, that if we didn't do a good job covering whatever we're covering, there'll be other newspapers, other TV stations, other radio stations who will. I said, and the advertisers know that, and the advertisers generally go to the paper that does the best job, or newspaper TV station does the best job. So competition helps us, it doesn't hurt us. And a couple other questions, and the second one was the toughest. How do you know what's important? If you pick up the Miami Herald and Chicago Tribune, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Denver Post, and the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, and the San Francisco Examiner, and they all have different front pages, how do you know what's really important? He said, in our papers, he said, all the big papers carry the same big stories, so our readers know what's really important. How do American readers know what's important? And I had to think about that for a few seconds, and I said, I think the answer is we don't know. But we find out on our own. That's why the papers all look different, because it depends on where you live. He said, but isn't that misleading people who don't have the information to say that New York and Washington has and Chicago and St. Louis doesn't? I said, well, it works both ways, and we can get it. I said, we can get what we want to get. I said, particularly with the internet now, but this is in '87, that didn't happen. Third question he asked, he said, that isn't it true that AP, the Washington Post, the New York Times, and CBS News essentially set the standard for what news is? If that's true, how can you claim you have an open, free, varied press? And I told him there is some truth to that, but it's not to the degree that he's implying, because whether or not we use that stuff is up to the individual papers. And to the degree to which a paper is owned, particularly not by a conglomerate, by a family, they can do whatever the hell they please, but they also have to answer it if they live in the town they live in. I gave him an example. When Pulitzer owned this paper, JP3 as we called him when I was there, the guy lived out in West County somewhere, or Central West End somewhere, I don't know exactly, but if there was something in the paper that we printed, that people he had dinner with, went to the play with, went to the symphony with, went to the show with, restaurant didn't like, he heard about it. I said it meant, I told him, I said it meant that we have a direct line to the publisher and the printer, and so does everybody in town, which is why I miss family papers, and why big conglomerates make, I think, less successful owners of the Post-Dispatch than JP3 did. That's one story. Back in about 1990, Bill McClellan, for whom I have great admiration, wrote a column that sort of poked fun at the Bush family as the royalty of St. Louis, which they were for years and years and still are to some degree. And he wrote this sort of metaphor / fairy tale about the great family of Bush on Gravois and how the king did this and the queen did that. And it got pulled by the managing editor, who was a friend of the Bush family. And Bill's a pretty big name then and still is now. He protested this, but in fact, the people that run the paper own the paper. So Joe Pulitzer III had to make this decision. And while he was deciding whether or not to back up the managing editor who pulled the story because he thought it would upset his friends, the Bush family, Bill or someone managed to get it printed in the Globe Democrat, including a story about the Post holding it. He gave the Post a black eye, and it gave the Globe ratcheted a notch up from what the Post-Dispatch was, which is the point of the story is its competition is key. It's why if we had two papers in this town, both papers would be healthier, but computers make that unlikely now. But at the time, it gave the Post-Dispatch a black eye because they were not giving the readers what they expected openly and freely, which is what we should get. It's an open marketplace of ideas that Milton talks about, that my students hear about all the time. But it could happen now. It couldn't happen then because there's hardly any place to go except for the internet, and I don't know if the same people read the internet to read the Post, although I'd like to think they might, at least after my classes. End of story, too.
Thank you, Professor Meyer, for sitting down with us here on Mondays in Midtown. Some very interesting stories he has to share, and always many more where that came from. Coming up next, like always, we will end our show with Dr. Z. Schaefer bringing us Communicating.
Hello. Today I wanted to talk about something known as selective perception. Other people might call this confirmation bias. This occurs on a daily basis between all human beings, and it basically is when we're listening or talking to someone, or we're watching the news, or engaging in conversations with small groups or organizations, we selectively choose the information that already fits what we currently know, our current belief structure, our current values. It's a lot easier to find information that fits into those beliefs and values rather than have to rearrange or change our beliefs and values. And that's not necessarily a good thing. It happens on an interpersonal level when you're communicating with someone one-on-one. We tend to only hear the things that benefit our side of the story or our side of the argument, and that's not really listening. That's only half the side of the story. Confirmation bias is another way to call that selective perception, in the sense that we confirm our current beliefs, and it results in bias, right? It results in sort of subjective judgments that aren't really accurate. And this is problematic because both on an interpersonal level, an organizational level, and a societal level, that can lead to chaos to some degree, and it will definitely lead to faulty argumentation, which then results in a lack of trust and unpredictability in relationships. Thus, it's sometimes a good thing to search out information that might contradict your current beliefs. One thing, it can strengthen your current beliefs because then you have an understanding of your opposition. Two, it might then help you understand your opposition, which can build empathy between people, and that's always a good thing. Thank you.
As always, a great segment by Dr. Z. Schaefer, and that was Communicating with Dr. Z. We really appreciate you being on the show each and every week, as it's a great way to wrap it up. All right, well, we want to remind you we won't be back now on SLU-TV here with Mondays in Midtown until November 28th, the week following Thanksgiving break. But you can email us at mondaysinmidtown@gmail.com, or you can also follow us on Facebook. I'm your host, Willie McKenna. Thank you for joining us this week on Mondays in Midtown. And once again, be sure to tune in November 28th for our next episode. Have a great break.